So what is the Lord's Supper? This word we call Lord's Supper, communion, maybe you've heard it called Eucharist, breaking bread. Westminster Confession, Shorter Catechism number 96 says, what is the Lord's Supper? It says this: the Lord's Supper is a sacrament in which by giving and receiving bread and wine according to Christ's appointment, his death is proclaimed, and those who receive rightfully are by faith and not by the mouth in a physical manner made partakers of his body and blood with all his benefits to their spiritual nourishment and growth in grace. Now that was a lot, and it was maybe hard to follow, but I want to break it down for us. That first, sacrament is something physically happening, something we can taste and see with our senses. We can see it with our eyes, we can taste it with our lips, and all the ways we can touch it. But at the same time, there's something spiritually that is happening in the Lord's Supper, that when we're giving and receiving bread and wine in the cup, that something spiritually is happening. And depending on your background, that may be new news to you. So there's kind of three different views when we think of the Lord's Supper, Eucharist, communion. And from one view is called Transubstantiation. It's a long word. But some believe when they're taking that bread and taking that cup, it's a very literal meaning of it, that it is the literal body of Christ, or it's the literal blood of Christ. Now that's one view. Another view is the Memorialist view that says, this is just a memorial of what's happening. There's nothing going on. It's just a bread and a cup, and we're just remembering what Christ has done. But what we would say from the Reformed view, what we would say is happening in the Lord's Supper, that the bread and the cup, the bread and the wine never change. It's just bread, common bread. It's just a common cup, wine or juice. But that when we take of it, that there's something spiritually happening. It's a physical sign, but it signifies a spiritual reality. And in that, Christ, because we're united with Christ, he nourishes us. He helps us grow in grace. He helps us grow in our faith where we are weak. He lifts us up. And that we proclaim the Lord's death, that we proclaim what he's done for us, his body given for us, his blood, this ushering of the new covenant. And spiritually, Jesus nourishes us when we are weak. We believe something happens in that meal. We believe something happens where it comes to us because we're united with Christ. So what is the Lord's Supper? It's a sacramental meal that God has given us to remind us of what he's done, to give us a foretaste of what he will do when all things are made right. But in this moment where we may feel weak, when we may fall short, God nourishes us, those who are believers, nourishes us in grace and in faith.